All right, y'all, welcome to the show. I got a great one for you today. So in just a second, we're going to talk about the Bernie to Trump pipeline. Is it real? If it is real, what does it mean? And why is that happening with at least some high-profile figures who supported Bernie in 2016, perhaps some even in 2020, and then now all of a sudden they're on Trump's nuts. So we'll talk about that. We got a lot of Trump news, so he has gone fully unhinged. Wait until you see what he said in his interview with Dr. Phil. He also got indicted again. This is Jack Smith. Now, remember, the Supreme Court offered immunity to Trump, and so basically Jack Smith had to go back to the drawing board and figure out, all right, which ways can I now go after him, and which charges do I have to drop because of the Supreme Court ruling? And look, truth be told, yeah, some charges are no longer there, but the bulk of them still are. So they're still trying, man. They're still trying. And, you know, when I give you the specifics, you'll see even the one that they had to drop, it's preposterous that they had to drop it. And then later on, we'll discuss a Fox host making a very creepy sexual comment about Kamala Harris. And, you know, that led to some backlash. We'll get to desperate Republican attacks against Tim Walz. It's only gotten worse and worse and worse since the last time we talked about it. Wait until you see this new line of attack that they try to do. And then Israel is trying to Gaza the West Bank now. This actually just came out right before I came on air. Israel has invaded the West Bank. So, I mean, it's already just an insufferable, unbearable, intolerable situation on the ground there. And Israel, of course, is hell-bent on making it worse. All right, so everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. That helps out big time. It costs you nothing at all. And let's go ahead and dive into it. So the other day, we had Tulsi Gabbard not only endorse Trump, I mean, she kind of did already in the recent past, but she also, like, they made a big show of it. They did a rally together, and Tulsi gave a little bit of a speech, and then Trump came out and spoke, and so she endorsed him, and she's, like, enthusiastically supporting him. I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up joining him on the campaign trail. So this happened just the other day, and what you're seeing a lot of now on Twitter, it's comments like this, right? This person's actually being pretty nice about it, but they say, "What a journey," and you can see here Tulsi Gabbard saying, why I'm endorsing Bernie Sanders for president, right? Why I'm endorsing Bernie Sanders for president. And then over here, that was all the way back in 2015, 2016. And then over here, Tulsi Gabbard endorses Trump for president. The claim that's being made by a lot of people, as they see this happen and they see RFK Jr. endorse Trump, they're saying, look, this proves horseshoe theory is real. So in other words, the far right and the far left kind of meet up on the political spectrum and tend to agree. And this is viewed as not only evidence of the horseshoe theory being real, but some people are going far as to say it's proof. Okay, so let's break this down in a couple different ways, and I'll tell you where I think this phenomenon comes from. So the high-profile examples of what you'd call the Bernie to Trump pipeline, Tulsi Gabbard is a great example. RFK Jr. is a great example. He endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. I don't know if he did in 2020 in the primary, but he did in 2016. He, of course, endorsed Trump this time around. Then, of course, you have some high-profile media figures who have effectively gone from Bernie Sanders back in the day to Donald Trump now. People that come to mind, Jimmy Dore, Matt Taibbi. He had a tweet the other day where he said, for every time somebody calls me racist, sexist, or, you know, whatever, fill in the blank, I'll donate $1 to Trump. And then you have Russell Brand, of course. He also sort of took this path. And the first point I want to make in reaction to this is that what the consistent trend you see through all of these people who did this is that these are either politician types, right? So like high profile people who have a name in the public, like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., or like, you know, you could say activist-y too, that's RFK Jr., or they're media figures like Jimmy Dore, Matt Taibbi, Russell Brand, you know, comedians, talk show hosts, investigative or independent reporters or journalists or whatever you want to call somebody like Matt Taibbi. And this phenomenon is not nearly as common among regular people, among working people, among the voting population. And in fact, there's data to sort of back this up. So, for example, in 2016, only 12% of Bernie supporters who voted for him in the primary ended up voting for Trump in the general election. 12%. Now, you might hear that and say, well, I mean, look, that's 1 out of 10. That's a pretty high number. But you have to compare it to others. So, for example, 28% of Hillary Clinton supporters who were with her in the 2008 primary over Barack Obama, 28% of them ended up voting for McCain in the general election, right? So we're talking more than double. And the other point to make is, when it comes to RFK Jr. and when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard in particular, these are people who, they supported Bernie in 2016, but they supported Joe Biden in 2020, right? And, you don't see much of people saying, this is the centrist to right-wing pipeline because these people supported Biden in the most recent election and now they're supporting Trump. So nobody says like centrist to right-wing pipeline, but you could probably dig up just as many examples, if not more examples statistically, of people who were more centrist type liberals who then end up going to the right. So that's the first point, okay, that this is more of an issue among high-profile individuals, media figures, activists, politicians. It seems to happen more with them than it does among the regular voting population, right? So it's not as much of an ironclad rule. It's not as much of a trend as you would think based off these high-profile examples. Okay, now, having said that, why? Why are these people doing what they're doing? What's with their political transformation? Well, look, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think there are a number of answers to it. So first of all, I do sense that with a lot of these people, there's this contrarianism to the mainstream, right? They feel like, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be contrarian. If I feel like, mainstream media or popular culture is going in one direction, I'm going to be a sore thumb and I'm going to stick out and I'm going to be contrarian. There's also some semblance of like edginess gets eyeballs, right? There's a sense of, if I do this, I'm being edgy. With some of these characters, I think this is undeniable, especially when it comes to people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, where they basically burn their bridges on the Democratic side. So there's this element of careerism and opportunism where they try to stay relevant. If your team turns on you, well, then to stay relevant, you don't have a future on the Democratic side anymore. That's obvious because they despise you. So what do? They do the logical thing from a career and opportunistic perspective, which is, all right, maybe the other side will welcome me with open arms. If I start being the voice that says, I'm a leftist and Trump is right about everything. And then the other thing, for the media figures in particular, of course, I think a big factor here is, look, they generating clicks. You want to generate clicks. And this is a lane that is clearly very profitable. I think right-wing voters they love the idea of a transition story, right? Not involving trans people, of course, but they love the idea of a political transition story of like, I was with them, but now I'm with you, and I could tell you all the inner workings of the other side and how evil and bad and wrong and nefarious they are because I was in the belly of the beast. We saw this with Dave Rubin, for example. I think that's a big part of it. I think just generating clicks, and then also connected to that is eventually audience capture, right? Eventually audience capture. I remember a while ago, there was a video where Jimmy Dore, now remember, his posture for a very long time is like, look, I'm a lefty and I'm to the left of the Democrats and I'm going to criticize the Democrats from their left. For a long time, that was his shtick. And I remember he released a video where he was criticizing the Biden administration because at that time, there were some really bad videos coming out of the southern border where like the Border Patrol were beating the shit out of, people trying to cross the border or whatever it was, or it had something to do with somebody on a horse or whatever. The details are kind of irrelevant, but he did a video basically saying like, look at this, look at how extreme this is. The Democrats are exactly like Trump. This is not the way to go about the border. And then when you look at his comment section, he got way more dislikes than he normally would on the video. And when you read his comment section, since he had been bashing the Democrats so much for so long, his comment section was just full of right-wingers who in this instance were like, no, fuck those immigrants. The Border Patrol is right, and you're wrong, Jimmy. And then from then, he didn't mention the border for a very long time because he knew it pissed off his audience. And then the next time he did end up bringing up the border, all of a sudden now he's a border hawk, right? And he wants to crack down on the border. And it's not the left-wing criticism that in the past he would have made. And so I think that's a perfect example of audience capture, where now you realize, okay, I've crafted this audience for myself and I need to feed them what they want to hear, right? So that's another example of why they end up taking this path. The other thing is, look, with a lot of these people, they have taken anti-establishment politics. They've taken that kind of thinking to the extreme of now believing that anything that's the opposite of the establishment is correct by default, right? So one good example of this is, like, every lefty you'd meet is going to be anti-big pharma because of the profit margins, because of the price gouging, because, you know, the government invests up front in the research and development to create these drugs. Then the drug companies swoop in, buy up the patent rights, and sell it back to everybody and price gouge the shit out of them. So every reasonable lefty is anti-big pharma, and they want to see reform. And, you know, in my opinion, I want to see it nationalized, but other people might want to do more antitrust approach and like break up the big pharma companies. But either way, everybody on the left is one extent or another anti-big pharma. But with this crowd, oftentimes it goes from I'm anti-big pharma, and they cross the line into I'm just anti-modern medicine. Right? Like I'm anti-vaccine, for example. And that is the mindset of I'm so anti-establishment that now I'm just going to assume the exact opposite of whatever the establishment says. And that leads you into some pretty fucking stupid places. It leads you into thinking like alternative medicine is actually better and helps people more than proven scientific double-blind study researched medicine, because the double-blind study research medicine happens to be sold by a big pharma company. So now the criticism is no longer, hey, the medicine works, but you're price gouging people and that's bad. Now the criticism is the medicine just doesn't work and you're poisoning people on purpose, right? Another example of this thinking, taking the anti-establishment mindset to an extreme position, would be I'm against mainstream media, right? And every reasonable person on the left is, to one extent or another, against mainstream media. They think they do a poor job, etc. Profit motive is an issue, yada, yada. All that stuff is true. But they take the default opposite perspective, which is, well, actually, I think Alex Jones is much more reliable than mainstream media. And that's just fundamentally not true. In fact, it's one of the dumbest fucking things I've ever heard in my life. If you look at the accuracy rate of the stuff mainstream media says versus Alex Jones, mainstream media is going to be right a way higher percentage of the time than fucking Alex Jones, who's a liar, right? I mean, this guy literally says he thought Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are literal demons, and one of them smells like sulfur, and look, a fly landed on Barack Obama, therefore he's fucking Baphomet or whatever. The shit he says. And then provably untrue things, and people just act like, no, we don't need to fact check him. You know, he just let him do his thing. And then what they do is take the kernels, the rare instances where he's right, and go, see, he's more trustworthy than mainstream media. That's taking anti-establishment politics to the dumbest possible conclusion, because your default perspective is the establishment must be wrong in all circumstances. And then beyond that, with some of these characters, not with all of them, with some of them, I think there's an element of accelerationism, right? The idea that, hey, in order to get left-wing victories, you have to burn it all down to build something fresh and new. And then if that is your perspective, you could see how somebody who's nominally on the left would take the position, well, Trump will lead to the system burning all down faster, and we can have a revolution after that and fix everything. Therefore, we're going to go in that direction. But again, I think that's just, accelerationism, I think, is just an idiotic position. I think there's zero evidence for it whatsoever. When Republicans get in there and they make things worse, usually what happens is that drags the Democrats further to the right on the spectrum, and things keep getting worse and worse and worse. It's never the case that, oh, it got so bad that everything collapsed, and now we can create a socialist utopia out of that. That doesn't fucking happen. All the evidence you need is during the George W. Bush administration, right? Started 2 illegal wars, did tax cuts for the rich, dragged the spectrum to the right, and it wasn't so bad that everything collapsed and then the Democrats came in and ushered in a utopia. No, it just dragged the Democrats further to the right. And you see the same thing under the Trump administration. It's just not a correct theory to say, let's go for the worst candidate so everything implodes, then we'll magically build something new and fresh and it'll work even better. That never fucking happens. That never happens. And then finally, and this is probably the biggest factor, I saved it for the end. Why do these people do what they do? Why do they end up taking the positions they end up taking? Why did they effectively go from a Bernie Sanders supporter to a Donald Trump supporter? This answer is very straightforward. They hate liberals. They hate liberals. They hate Democrats. And that is, honestly, in many instances, the core of a lot of these people's politics. They just have a seething hatred for liberals and Democrats. Now, look, here's the thing. And I'd be curious to know what Bernie thinks about this. Because Bernie Sanders, he always was the kind of politician where he would take a lot of time shitting on the Republicans and their policies and saying how bad the policies are, right? And talking about the substantive issues. But there were many instances with Bernie Sanders rallies and speeches and interviews where Bernie would levy reasonable and strong-worded criticism against fellow Democrats, right? He would go after fellow Democrats for basically agreeing too much with the Republicans, doing neoliberal policies instead of progressive policies. And I think what happened with a lot of these characters who went from Bernie to Trump is they hyper-focus on Bernie's criticism of Democrats. And then they end up doing the same thing, but that's like all of their commentary and all of their thought process is, look at how fucking terrible the Democrats are. And they don't do what Bernie does, where Bernie, pairs that together with clearly explaining the Republicans are even worse, they're even more extreme, here's the fucked up things they do, but I do have some criticism for my side, for the Democratic side. These people just take the criticisms that Bernie made against Democrats, and that becomes their whole politics. That there's always criticism for liberals and Democrats. There's always a way of saying they're liars and they're nefarious and they're bad people. And they just memory hole all of the stuff said by Bernie and all the objectively correct stuff about how Republicans have fucking even more abysmal politics, right? And so I do think at the core of a lot of this, it has become, I just fucking hate liberals. That's my politics. I just fucking hate Democrats. They're hypocrites, they're bad people, they're nefarious, they said this, they did that, and it's like super scrutinizing everything any Democrat has ever done ever, but then they act totally credulous with Republicans, right? So in other words, if you get somebody like J.D. Vance who comes out and says, I want to extend the child tax credit and do it $5,000, make it even higher. This group of people is like, oh, look at that. The Republicans are out-lefting the Democrats. They're becoming more populist. And what do they omit? We just had a vote in the Senate on expanding the child tax credit, and J.D. Vance missed it on purpose. He didn't vote for it. If he was so pro-child tax credit, he would have showed up and voted for it. Instead, 44 Republicans voted against it, and his ass didn't even show up. So how can you say he's in favor of, increasing the child tax credit? That's nonsense. And then, by the way, Kamala also comes out within the same week and says, oh, he wants to do a $5,000 extended child tax credit. I want to do a $6,000 extended child tax credit. I'm one-upping you, bitch. And what are these people? Kamala doesn't mean it, and Kamala's wrong. Even though the Democrats did vote for the extended child tax credit, the Democrats don't mean it. The Democrats are liars. The Democrats are wrong. Look, they're copying J.D. Vance. No, J.D. Vance is a liar. He's a liar. If he supported extending the child tax credit, he could have fucking voted for it, and he didn't. 44 Republicans voted against it, right? So even just minor rhetoric from Republicans that is slightly more populist, and it's, oh, here comes the realignment. The Republicans are the working class party. But the Democrats can actually, in many instances, vote for the right policies. And it's like, no, that doesn't count because they're lying and they watered down the policy and it's worse for reasons X, Y, and Z. And it's totally fucking so much scrutiny of the Democrats under a fucking microscope and totally credulous about Republicans, even when it's just fucking rhetoric, right? Like this idea, Trump goes, I'm anti-war, whatever. He has a couple things that he says where, oh, sounds like that's an anti-war position, but then totally ignoring his record, right? Because he said the words, and I'm totally credulous when it comes to Republicans, so they're being more working class friendly. It's just, that's ultimately what ends up happening. So I don't want to say this isn't a real phenomenon, because it is. It's just overstated because it's high-profile media figures, right? Or it's either high-profile media figures, it's activists, it's politician types. These are the ones who did that Bernie to Trump journey, right? But among the population, it's way less common. In fact, what's more common is centrist to right-wing pipeline. But there are it's a real phenomenon, and there are, you can actually break it down and figure out how these people got where they ended up getting, right? And it's a sad thing because, look, I could tell you as a 2016 Bernie supporter and a 2020 Bernie supporter, I would rather put my nuts in a waffle iron than even consider voting for Donald Trump. You could put a gun to my head and I would never vote for Donald Trump. And there are a lot of us. There are a lot of us in the same boat, whether it's in the media or regular people or other politicians or whatever. You know, you don't see Crystal, who is a Bernie supporter, out there supporting Trump. You don't see Cenk Uygur or Anna Kasparian supporting Donald Trump. You don't see Hassan Piker. I'm just going with media right now, but you guys get the point. The point is there's way more of us who are like, no, we understand and we know what Trump is, right? And for some percentage of the population, they don't agree, right? So just to recap real quick, contrarianism to the mainstream. This is how these people ended up where they ended up, going from Bernie to Trump. Contrarianism to the mainstream. Edginess. Careerism, right? Staying relevant after your team turns on you. So careerism and opportunism is a big part of it. For some, the media figures generating clicks and eventually audience capture. Taking anti-establishment thinking to the extreme of believing anything that's the opposite of establishment thinking across the board. So instead of being anti-big pharma, now you're anti-modern medicine. Instead of just being anti-mainstream media, you say, oh, and Alex Jones has some great points too, right? Some are accelerationists as well. And then, of course, I think the biggest part of it is they just fucking hate liberals. They just fucking hate Democrats. And they took what were reasonable criticisms that Bernie made against Democrats and liberals. They've taken that, put it on steroids and human growth hormone, and that's all they talk about, and they give the Republicans a complete pass. That's the magic stew as to how you get this toxic-ass dumb mix. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.